Hello. You can support the Delicious Legacy podcast now with one-off donations at ko-fi.com. Just go to ko-fi.com/The Delicious Legacy podcast, all one word, and you can give one-time £5 to say thank you for the podcast. Cheers. On today's episode, I've got the great honor to have with me Emiko Davies, the author of the new book, The Japanese Pantry. She's also the author of Gohan, Everyday Japanese Food. And she, together with her husband, they have a natural wine shop and cooking school in the heart of Tuscany in Italy. Enoteca Marilu, a space for culinary experiences. You can find more on her website, emikodavies.com, and also you can go to www.enotecamarilu.com to find out about the natural wine bar and cooking school. And I will leave details in the show notes. Hello, I'm Thom and this is the Delicious Legacy podcast. Welcome back to another archaeogastronomical adventure. Thanks for joining in. And let's take you to another adventure in the Far East, in the wonderful and delightful lands of Japan. This complex archipelago of islands with wild mountains and coasts that extends from nearly the tropical south to the very cold, almost Siberian north. And before I start, let me say thank you to all my Patreon backers. And you could become one if you go to www.patreon.com/The Delicious Legacy, where you can support the podcast monthly from $3. And of course, say thank you to my supporter, David Morrison, who won a copy of the Japanese Pantry. And hopefully it's with you now, David. Hello, Emiko. Welcome to the Delicious Legacy podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here, and thanks for joining me all the way from Italy.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here.
So we are talking today because you have a new book out, which is called The Japanese Pantry. But before that, could you tell me a little bit about what is your favorite dish ever? What dish you would eat every day if you could?
That's always a really tricky question for me because I like to eat according to my mood and the season. And so, things, I have favorite things at all different times. So It depends on the time of day, what the weather's like, how I'm feeling. Yeah, that's a really, really hard one. I don't think I can say just one thing, which is a really annoying answer.
Top five. That's fine. Do you have something like a different cuisine apart from the Japanese that you go to if you want to cook something like another favorite cuisine, let's say?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I live in Tuscany and I've been living here for like 20 years. And I used to live in Florence for a long time. And then in 2020, we moved to my husband's hometown, which is a really small village in between Florence and Pisa. And so now that I'm living like in the countryside and in a small town, it's really hard to sort of get ingredients to cook, anything other than Tuscan food. So I would say that is my go-to. That's really the food that I'm cooking most of the time, I think. And but I will say because of the ingredients that I can get at the market easily here and the ingredients that we have in the little delis and the shops that I have in my town, it's the easiest food to cook is something Tuscan.
Excellent. Do you find any similarities that you can see between the Tuscan cuisine and the cuisine from back in Japan? Anything that you can say? Okay.
Yeah, there's actually a lot more things I think than what people would think of. For example, I used to live in southern Tuscany, right on the coast, and in that area in particular, because you're you've got both the sea and then also this sort of very wild, mountainous kind of forested area. You have all of this sort of forest food like mushrooms and chestnuts and things like that, wild game and things like that. And then you have the seafood as well.
Okay.
And so quite often the two things are sort of mixed together.
Yeah.
And that really reminds me so much of Japanese food. In fact, one of the things my mother has always said is the perfect dish. And I think she's talking about Japanese dishes, but the perfect dish or the perfect meal anyway should have something from the mountain and something from the sea. And when we lived in southern Tuscany, that's what I found is that we lived on Monte Argentario, which is essentially a mountain tip coming out of the sea.
Right.
And the dishes were things like one of their favorite dishes is mushrooms with calamari. And the first time I tasted that, I thought, wow, there's something really Japanese about this. And I realized it's this mixture of these particular sort of mountain flavors or forest flavors and seafood combined together.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds quite interesting, actually. I don't think I've tried something similar. Great. I remember on our little supper club when you were in London a month or so ago, you did all these little different dishes, like 5 or 6 different dishes on that bento box, right?
Yeah.
And so they were all like small portions, like small sizes, like a bit like, again, it reminded me a little bit of a Greek and Middle Eastern meze platters. So you have all these little. Do you eat a lot of stuff on such a small levels and lots of different variations of dishes, basically on the meal, usually?
Yeah. In Japan, it's very typical to have lots of little dishes on the table. In fact, it's one of my favorite ways of eating. I love when you get all those little dishes on the table and you've got, this array of things to try. It's really one of the things I love about Japanese food. Even in home cooking, my grandmother would always have, a little dish of this, a little dish of that, a little something. Sometimes, there'd be a couple different types of pickles, or she'd have, something from the night before and then something else that she'd made that day. And she'd put everything on the table, all these little dishes. There would always be a soup. There would always be a small bowl of rice. Yeah, just lots and lots of little things. And the other thing I like about eating that way is you can kind of graze over everything.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what order you're eating it in, or, you just sort of have a little taste of this and a little taste of that. You can go back and forwards, however way whichever way you like. I love that. And that aspect is very different to how meals are eaten in Italy.
Yeah, because in the book you're talking about the concept of 1 soup, 3 dishes as well. So almost immediately you have like an array of different things on the table.
Yeah, and sometimes there's definitely more than just 1 soup and 3 dishes. That would be like the minimum. Sometimes there's many, many little things. But I love this way of eating.
Great, fantastic. So let's introduce a little bit the book here. So the Japanese Pantry, which was released in October, just a month ago. And tell me a little bit about how did you come up with this, with the concept of the book, and what is it about in a few words, basically?
So my last book, Gohan, was my first book about Japanese food after writing, many books about Italian cuisine. And when that book came out, I had hoped to, sort of write about home cooking, Japanese home cooking, try and show people how it was very simple, just kind of about opening your fridge and, and cooking with what you've got. And I wanted it to feel, not very intimidating. Basically, I wanted to encourage people to try and cooking Japanese food at home like they would Italian food. And then one of the things I had consistently when that book came out was people ask me about the ingredients.
Right.
So I kept getting questions like, is it hard to get these ingredients? Or how can you tell, what are the best kind of ingredients to get? Or how do I choose a good, miso or soy sauce? People asked about, do I need lots of ingredients in order to make Japanese food? So there was, anyway, ingredients was like the big theme that people kept asking me about. And I thought, okay, people kind of need some advice also on the ingredients, and maybe I should just go back to basics and write about those ingredients and sort of give people a kind of a handbook on how to use those. And one of the other things I wanted to show in this book, again, continuing with the whole Japanese food is really easy, is really that you only need a handful of pantry ingredients that can kind of hold up, have these really traditional, really typical Japanese flavors. And then you open your fridge, see what you've got in there, or you go to the market. What have you got in the market? What have you got in the supermarket? Whatever it is, just you can whip it together by just having these couple of Japanese pantry ingredients that are going to be your backbone.
Exactly. You have this, basically the book kind of has 7 key ingredients in a sense. So you're talking about soy sauce, miso, rice vinegar. So the chapters of the book,
yes,
they're separated by these ingredients, which are the key. And that's a really great concept. And you go, I would probably make a disservice to the book just saying that how amazing it is, but it's not just that. It's basically you go into detail. You have wonderful details about each ingredient. You go to the history of each ingredient and to the producers themselves, right? And you talk about that behind each ingredient. And I love that. I love the book. And everything's great because obviously the recipes are there. The photography is fantastic. So it's a great book. And we add all this history that you're talking about. But before going to some more details, so we should probably mention that we said miso and sake and soy sauce and seaweed and rice vinegar. They're some of the key elements of Japanese cooking. Can we be a bit brief on what is miso, for example? So for people who don't know what miso is exactly.
Yeah, so these are the ingredients that I picked as these are my favorite it's my essentials, the seven ingredients. And I'm going to go ahead right away and say you don't need all 7 to make it. Even if you have a few of these, you can already do so much with them. But okay, so miso is a fermented soybean paste. It is very, very unique to Japan. So you can't substitute other soybean pastes for miso. It's just not going to taste the same.
Right.
And the same with soy sauce. I think that people may not know, well, this is kind of why I wrote this, but they may not know about this, but Japanese ingredients are so unique because of how isolated Japan was for many centuries. And because it is in itself, it's an archipelago. So, it's not like other Asian countries that are connected to each other. Japan is really on its own. And so over the centuries, it really developed its own unique flavors. And they really come from the fermentation process using natural yeasts that only exist in Japan, which is why those things only taste like that in Japan. So Japanese soy sauce, for example, is very different to Chinese soy sauce or Korean soy sauce. They're not all the same. And so they are not good substitutes for each other. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to cook Japanese food, you really do need a Japanese soy sauce.
Yeah. You talk basically how it's been made. And of course, both soy sauce and miso, they're made from soya beans, right?
Yes.
But they're different processes, or one is like the next stage of the other?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Yeah, one is like the start,
yeah,
and the other is the byproduct, really. So I should have put them in a different order. Actually, I should have put miso first, and then soy sauce afterwards to better tell this story. But miso, when you're making miso, there is this liquid that comes out of the paste during the fermentation process. And so, when I make it in jars, I always leave a room at the top of the jar because this liquid sort of comes out and it can burst out of your jar, and you'll find your pantry shelves are all sticky. But this is a liquid. It's called tamari, and people may know of tamari as a type of soy sauce, a sort of gluten-free soy sauce. And that is basically what it is, because miso is made with just soybeans, salt, and koji, which is this natural yeast that grows on rice. And this is all you need for a miso. Soy sauce is usually made also with a mixture of wheat in it, and it can be up to 50% wheat and soy sauce, but you can also make it with just soybeans, and that's what tamari is. So essentially soy sauce is the liquid that comes from the miso, the
Yeah.
fermentation of the miso paste. And now, soy sauce is obviously its own sauce, its own condiment in its own right. And so it's made just for the soy sauce. But originally, I think when they were discovering these fermentations, miso was the more important one, and soy sauce happened to come out of it.
So when we're talking about these things in the past, what are the oldest sources that you found of these ingredients, in a sense? How far back we go?
Oh, at least 2,000 years. And both of these processes, the soy sauce and the miso, they originated in China. And they were brought over to Japan. A lot of ingredients and a lot of techniques were brought to Japan from China. Many of them, it took until about the 6th century to come into Japan, and that was through Buddhist monks coming from mainland China into Japan and spreading Buddhism, but also showing these different foods that they were making. And there's evidence though that miso was much, much older and was already present in Japan.
All right.
Yes, yeah. Before the more commonly known, miso history. And those areas where there's evidence of this older miso culture are still the areas today that are best known for the artisanal miso. It's like the miso heartland of Japan.
Right.
And
where is it?
So these would be like northern Honshu, so north of Tokyo. And kind of like quite cold weather areas. The original miso, before it was brought by Buddhist monks into Japan, would have been made with animal products, so fermented fish guts. And, for me, when I think of that, I am immediately thinking of ancient Roman and Etruscan garum.
Garum, yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is fermented fish guts, So eventually the Buddhist monks found a vegetarian solution.
Of course.
Because, they were, wanting, they were sort of looking for more, they were not eating animal products. And so soybeans replaced the fish in their sauces. And then that is where miso and the soybean paste that we know now, like dobanjang and similar soybean pastes in Asia, they all sort of came out of that history.
Yeah. So obviously you travel to these places to find out these artisanal producers of miso and soy sauce as well. So is it the same area as well? Like soy sauce and miso, the same people make these products?
Yeah, they're both made now, all over Japan. But there's definitely, like, as I mentioned, the heartland of miso area where, there's a much bigger percentage of people making miso. And soy sauce is also made in various places around Japan. But the place that I visited where I wanted to go and see the production is in southern Japan. And it was it was on an island called Shodoshima. This is in the Seto Inland Sea, so we're talking Shikoku area. And they were making this soy sauce in open vats using huge wooden cedar barrels, which are, 150 years old. And everything they really were going back to how these things were being produced 150 years ago, which is quite amazing because, there's not many people doing that kind of work anymore in Japan. And so he had all these old ones that he was using where he's, fermenting soy sauce for 4 years. And and the production was becoming more and more. So he wanted to have more barrels. He had to learn how to make them himself.
Yeah, amazing. That kind of ties up a little bit with my next question, I suppose, that when you were traveling around Japan off the beaten track and finding things, discovering things, what did you discover that you didn't know at all, you had no idea about, and it was brand new for you as well? Was there something like that?
Everything.
Everything, okay, fair enough.
My idea for traveling around was to look at the production was because I realized I was sort of standing in the supermarket and I was like, I don't actually know how soy sauce is made, and or like rice vinegar, and here in Italy, this is one of the things that I do here. I run food workshops where I take people to visit producers, and so we're visiting olive oil producers participating in the harvest and then taking it to the mill and watching how it's made. Or I've taken people to balsamic vinegar places where we're learning about how 12-year-old balsamic vinegar is made. And I just sort of realized that I didn't know how those Japanese ingredients were made. And so I decided to travel around wherever I could, basically, whoever would respond to me and let me visit. And one of the places that was really incredible was a vinegar factory. So this was a rice vinegar factory in Onomichi, which is a small town near Hiroshima, and also on the Seto Inland Sea, but on the other side of the sea. It was a 400-year-old vinegar factory, which I think is amazing. And,
wow.
and they're not open to the public. So the manager literally just opened the door for me and took me around and showed me everything and told me about the history of it. He said the only reason we can say we're the oldest vinegar factory is because the other ones were, destroyed either by tsunamis or earthquakes or bombs from World War II. And that really struck me because I think, in places like Onomichi, in this small town, used to be a merchant town where ships would carrying, cargo up and down Japan. They would stop and they would load up on vinegar and then, and take them to other parts of Japan. So this was a vinegar town and there's only this one place left. But I think that's quite amazing that sort of heritage is still standing somewhere in Japan, and that there must have been so much more, but so much of it was destroyed over the centuries.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really surprised me in that place was after showing me some of their vats and, sort of explaining that the rice vinegar process, which is, I think, comparable to sort of white wine or red wine vinegar.
Yeah.
You have to first make sake and then you turn the sake into vinegar. And so similarly to wine vinegars. And he showed me the room where they cultivate the acetic bacteria, which is what they're using to turn the sake into vinegar. And it was amazing. I'd never seen anything like that. He had it in this room with basically like really, really long, narrow and shallow troughs. And on top of these troughs was this web-like sort of substance, which is the bacteria.
I see.
And it's really long and narrow and shallow, so they have a lot of surface area. So they've got this, they're sort of cultivating this bacteria. And he said, this is the most important room in the entire factory. And he said, we're here 365 days of the year. Someone has to come every day to check on the bacteria, make sure it's healthy, make sure it looks good. I found that really, really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. And the rice vinegar, obviously, to make that, you need sake. And sake is another product from rice, and it's an alcoholic drink. Can you tell us a few things about people who don't understand? Like, some people think it's more like a wine thing, but it's not that at all.
Yeah, I think because in English we call it rice wine, and it's a bit misleading because it's not really a wine; it's brewed, more similar to beer.
Exactly,
and
it has technique, and
exactly. And for example, in Italy, people tend to shy away from sake. They're like afraid to drink it because they think because it's served in like small cups and it's clear, they think it's a really strong liquor, like
grappa.
Like grappa.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh no, I don't think I want to have that with my food. But it's not at all. It's it's similar to the alcoholic content in wine. It's just drunk in small sips and smaller cups and things. But I think there's a lot that could be done to sort of teach people more about how to drink sake, or what it is, how to enjoy it with food, and also how to cook with it. And that's why I have a chapter on it, because I think that sake in cooking is really, really important. It's one of the things that gives dishes that uniquely Japanese flavor. And I don't think there's anything that you can substitute for sake. Like you could leave it out, but it's not going to taste the same.
Right, I see.
Yeah, you can't substitute wine, for example, because sake is sweeter. Like it's not sweet, but it is, because it's made with rice, it is, sort of a sweeter flavor.
Definitely, yeah.
It has a really umami flavor. And I know that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. There literally is no other way to describe sake. It is umami. And it just gives dishes this extra something, which you could explain by saying it's umami, And what that is it will, enhance all of the flavors in the dish that you're making.
Yeah, it will kind of bring the other flavors into the foreground as well, give them a bit of a color and brightness.
Exactly. Yes, yes.
You're listening to the Delicious Legacy podcast by me, Thom. There's more to come after the break, and it gets better. Okay, so basically we talked about sake now, so I'm going to ask you about the concept of never wasting anything. So the sake lees. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How did that came about, and found how it tastes and can use it in food, and what is it?
Yeah, sake lees. So it was not on my radar before I started researching this book. I mean, I'd come across it. I've definitely eaten it in Japan. I just didn't realize what it was. And basically it is the leftovers. When you're making sake, you have this rice mash, okay, a rice mash, and it's been combined with koji, and it's brewed, and then when everything is ready, it's brewed and fermented over various times, and each brewery does something different to it. But essentially, it all comes out at the end. What you have to do is then you filter out the rice. So this rice mash, you filter it out so that you've got the liquid and the solids separate. Quite similar, actually, this part is similar to winemaking, where you're pressing the grapes and you separate the solids from the liquid. And just like grape must is always used as well, that's never wasted, so is sake lees. So sake lees is the leftover solid part once you've pressed or filtered the liquid out.
Yeah.
And depending on how that process is done, it can be either quite soft and like a paste, like similar to miso, like miso paste, that kind of consistency. Or it can be really, really dry and actually crumbly because it's been pressed really hard. So you've got these two, kind of different consistencies, but the concept is the same. The sake lees is this like leftover, fermented, slightly alcoholic rice mash or rice paste. And you can use it like it's a delicious food. So you can use it to pickle vegetables in, and literally all you need to do is just bury them in there. I like to mix some miso in there as well. That will give it this salty and more sort of tasty flavor, because sake lees is quite sweet.
Yeah.
Because it's sweet, it's often used in baking. So you can put it in bread and it'll make your bread like really soft and fluffy. You can put it in cakes, in cookies. I've used it in cheesecake. In my book, I have a recipe for sake lees cheesecake. And I think it's really delicious. It's really like... gives it this almost like a yogurt-y, like a yogurt sort of tangy kind of flavor.
I see.
Yeah, really good. So it's a really interesting, you can also use it to marinate fish or chicken or meat in it. So it's a really, really interesting product, and it's really cheap because it's a byproduct.
Yeah.
So in Japanese supermarkets, or if you know a sake brewer. So yeah, so it's a really interesting product. It lasts ages because it's a fermented product. So if you have some in your fridge, you can experiment with it and try it in all these different things.
So basically, yeah, it's very versatile as well. Like you're talking about so many different things, from sweets to pickles. Like, yeah, wow.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I think fermentation was so important in Japan as well, because without refrigeration, fermented products could last a long time. And also something like miso, for example, was a really, really important food for everyone to have, from samurai to farmers to the poorest people. And it was because if there was ever a famine, which there often was, because Japan is a country that has, often been battered by natural disasters. So you have earthquakes, you have typhoons, you have tsunamis, right? And so, sometimes in a blink, a harvest could be wiped out.
Yeah.
But if you had miso, then you'd be okay, because miso can last years. I mean, technically it just gets more delicious the longer it ages.
Yeah.
And it's really, really nutritious. I mean, it's soybeans. So, you could always count on having miso. So there's a proverb in Japanese that says, everything will be all right as long as there is miso.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's such a genius thing. Like, like having, I suppose, soya beans that make soy. You have miso and tofu or whatever. You can have most of the proteins and macronutrients that you need, I suppose. It's just such a mind-blowingly genius thing.
Yeah, yeah. They even had special storehouses for the miso, so what's funny, I think, is that, the Japanese houses traditionally were made in wood.
Yeah.
Right, which are all put together without any nails. You could literally take it apart and put it back up again. And, wood and paper. So, highly flammable. But the storehouses where they kept miso in were made of clay. And so they were fireproof, which meant that even if you had, a fire, you'd have no house left, but you'd still have the miso. So you'd be okay. Everything is all right as long as there is miso.
Brilliant. I love that. Brilliant. Thank you. I think we should explain a little bit about koji, because obviously it's a very special ingredient.
It is. Yes. Koji this is what I mentioned earlier, the natural yeasts in Japan. And koji is one of those. So it's a natural fungus, yes, and it grows on rice, it grows on soybeans, a couple of other grains like barley, and it grows on the whole plant, so including the plant itself. So even rice straw, for example, straw that's made out of rice plants, has yeast naturally on it. So it's just like in the air, So in Japan, this is going to be one of the yeasts, one of the many yeasts, that we have, on our bodies, in our rooms, in our houses, in our living spaces, in our environment. And so it's one of the things that, naturally grew on products that were being made, so the fermented products. And it's a very important yeast in Japan because so many of their ingredients rely on koji. Miso and soy sauce I mentioned, but also sake, and therefore rice vinegar. And also some of the liqueurs that they make in Japan, like shochu, these are all made using koji. And because there's also, this is sort of the basis of Japanese cuisine. I mean, I would go as far as to say that this is one of the most important ingredients, because it really is an ingredient. It's the thing that makes all of these other ingredients, but it is the thing that makes everything taste Japanese.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And obviously nowadays the production is, I guess, there's more industrial production and more controlled, and you can buy it in batches that they have the same quality. But I guess in the past it was for more hit and miss and more of a magic thing, I suppose.
Yeah, more of a magic thing. I mean, it's like winemakers, natural winemakers today, they're trying to make wine using the natural yeast that occur, in their wine cellars, on their vines, rather than depend on yeasts that are selected and you just buy from a company and add, like an ingredient into your tanks.
Moving on a little bit, another important ingredient that I think features a lot, obviously in Japan, but not so much in other places. So the seaweed. So you have a big seaweed culture, and so many different things that you use in food. Can you tell me a little bit about why is that? Is it because there's so many islands, it's an archipelago, and people eat what's available from the sea? Is it very nutritious?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about this because, so many places are also surrounded by sea. I mean, look at Italy, right? Italy is also, why don't we eat seaweed in Italy? It's surrounded by sea. It's, mountainous like Japan. It's got a lot of coastline. So it got me sort of thinking about this because I know that in the UK, for example, there was, and maybe now there's a little bit of a resurgence of people, namely like chefs, sort of, foraging for local seaweeds. But I just wondered, nobody eats seaweed as much as the Japanese do. It's really it is something that everybody eats every day. And multiple different types of seaweed, but you eat it every day, okay? And I don't see that happening anywhere else in the world, at the amount and the rate, the frequency of Japan. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is that because of the fact that Japan was essentially a pescatarian culture for 1,200 years, where eating red meat was actually forbidden by the emperors for 1,200 years.
Wow. Okay.
So in succession from about the 600s until the 1870s. So until really, really recently, red meat was off the table. And when you look at Japan as well, in terms of its landscape and geography, there actually is no space, there's no place there for a meat-eating culture because there's just not enough land. So even today, when you look at what arable land Japan has, it's really small because Japan is like 3/4 mountain. So without that, the Japanese people had to find somewhere else to get their sustenance and nutrients from, right? And all around you had the sea and lots of it. And the sea, where Japan is, this not just the sea, they've got the ocean on one side and the sea on the other. So it's a really very, very abundant place for sea life. So there's plenty of seafood, but there's also plenty of different types of edible seaweed. And when you look at how nutritious seaweed is, you can see how it was a perfect substitute for meat and other proteins that they couldn't have for the landscape.
Yeah. One of the bases for soups, I think, kombu dashi is one of the basic stuff that you do a lot of foods, right? So
It is, yeah. I think kombu is probably one of the most important seaweeds in Japan because this is how you make dashi, which is like the broth or the stock that all soups, miso soup, but even like soups for noodles or sauces even, they're all made with dashi and these all have kombu in them.
Yeah.
So it is like the backbone of the whole cuisine is this dashi.
Yeah. You make, so the miso soup is basically you start with the dashi, you have your miso, and then you put anything else you want on that soup, or
Exactly.
you can have it as simple as that.
It's simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. You are listening to the Delicious Legacy podcast by me, Thom Dinas. There's more to come after the break, and it gets better. Could you tell me a little bit about let me try and pronounce it, of course, the ancient art of Yubeshi Nakai, the Yubeshi in the Nakai Samurai region?
Oh yeah, the Yubeshi. So this is one of the dishes that I thought maybe no one is going to be able to make this, but I want to put it in here anyway because I just wanted to record how it was made.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a dish that is very rare. It is disappearing. Not many people know about it, even in Japan. And it comes from such a tiny, tiny village. And this village, it's called Nakai Samurai, is what they call, like, it's not a village that's in like one place. It's sort of spread out through a forest. So it's quite isolated. And, the population is very elderly. I just feel like if I didn't record this, maybe that I would regret not having it in here, and that in 30 years' time, no one would know how to make this anymore. So I put it in the book because I just thought it was so fascinating. I went to visit this elderly tea producer in Nakai Samurai. She was 84 when I was visiting her, and she had in her property where she's got all of her tea plants and her tea bushes. She has huge yuzu trees. And, there are monkeys in these forests. So monkeys can't even reach the yuzu that are right at the top of the tree. And they've got so many of them that they're just sort of everywhere, right? So this is a recipe that they would use to preserve the yuzu, so make it last longer, and also to use them up because they had them. And basically what you do is you scoop out the flesh of a yuzu. So this is, a small citrus fruit. Think, slightly bigger than a mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
Very delicious sort of lemony scent and sort of sweeter than a lemon, somewhere between a lemon and a mandarin. So you cut the top off and scoop everything out. You leave the top so it's got like you've got a lid to put back on. And you make this miso paste that has, that you're filling back inside the yuzu with miso, with walnuts, the citrus, and then you fill it back up. It does have some rice flour in it as well, so you can put regular flour or rice flour or a mixture of the two, and you fill back the fruit. Okay, and put the lid back on, and then you steam them for hours and hours. And about halfway through, you sort of check it, you kind of reshape it, you put the lid back on, and you keep steaming. And then after it's steamed and it's sort of all become one, like the skin will sort of begin to turn sort of translucent, you then leave them to ferment. So you have to leave them on a shelf. And then you have to leave them on a shelf, and they ferment for months. And at that point, they all turn very, very dark, and that you kind of can't tell the difference anymore between the skin and the filling. And you slice it, and you eat this with tea or with sake. And it's a really like transportable, long-lasting, very nutritious sort of food to take with you as you were traveling. So it's a really, really, really ancient sort of food. I read about it even in a cookbook from the 1600s. So, we're talking really traditional.
Yeah, we're going back. That's amazing. I mean, like, who comes up with these things? And, basically ferments as well, has to stay for months, you said, right?
Yes, yeah. It takes 2 or 3 months. But a really interesting flavor because you have all the miso, so it's salty, but then you have this like incredible fragrance from the citrus, and then you have the walnuts inside, and then with the flour, it kind of makes it a little bit chewy. What was really interesting was when I went to visit this woman in Japan, you always give gifts. So when you meet people, you give them a small gift. And so I had brought with me some gifts from Tuscany that I wanted to give to people that I was meeting on this trip who were, giving me their time and showing me things. And because it was December, I brought with me a Tuscan panforte.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this dish, but it's
of course, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if everybody knows it, but it's traditional for Christmas, but it's made with flour. It's got lots of nuts in it. It has usually a honey or like syrup base in it, so it's quite sweet. But the texture, when you cut into it, is exactly the same as the Yubeshi. So when I presented this to Hama-san, the woman who showed me how to make these, she immediately wanted to open it and see what it was like.
Oh.
So she opened it and cut into it, and she went, "Oh, it's like a sweet Yubeshi." And it was amazing. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it was really like very, very similar. And also panforte is something that was produced to be something that would last long, that you could easily travel with.
Yeah.
Similar reasons, yeah.
I love all
similar
this.
age too, very, very, centuries old.
It's amazing. We cannot not talk about tea, right?
Yeah.
Japanese tea is very famous, of course, but also there's the tea ceremony, and also again, you went to some farmers up in remote places, and you met people who make tea, and they're pensioners basically. They're very old, and they're still making that tea. Why?
This was incredible. So this is the same lady who was showing me how to make yubeshi, and she's part of a community of 11 elders. They are all in their 80s, which is just mind-boggling. Also because this area where they're growing their tea is a really, really unusual kind of landscape. It's very, very steep. It's very thickly forested. And they have they're like small fields of bushes, and each person has a house and a small tea field on this really, really steep hill. I mean, I was worried walking through those tea bushes. I thought I was going to like roll down the hill and land in there's a river down below, but very far down below. It's sort of 300 meters up.
Oh God. Okay.
Really really, really steep, really unusual sort of landscape. And they each, they work as a community, so they help each other. They harvest together, so they sort of all band together and they harvest each other's tea. They do it all together. they grow tea the way that their grandparents made it, so no fertilizers other than the tea plants themselves, the old leaves, whatever else, they're using natural fertilizers there. They don't use any pesticides. And they say it's because we love drinking tea. We drink tea every day, all day. So we don't want to drink, things that have pesticides in them, which is just so lovely because they really are sort of working in harmony with the nature around them. And when you see this incredible landscape where they are, I mean, they're totally surrounded by this really, really thick forest. And far below them is this beautiful, like bright blue sort of river. And so they're working with that particular landscape. The river itself is something that provides a lot of moisture in the air. So they get this like fog that kind of protects the new leaves. And because they're on such a steep forested hill, they only have very few hours of sunlight, and then it means that their tea leaves are quite shaded, and so they don't get, they don't produce too many tannins. So it was a really, really interesting place to visit and sort of understand how they're working with their own landscape and nature to make this, beautiful tea that they love drinking all day long.
It sounds so beautiful, like
I know they're
idyllic.
always looking for. They said to me, because I wanted to come and help them harvest. They said, yes, please, come. And if you're free in May, that's the time to go.
Fair enough. Okay, let's all book tickets and go in May and help. These elderly people.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess it's a community that's shrinking as well. So it's not something that younger people will do. Or are there any young people on those communities up in the mountains?
Well, actually, so the woman who I met who helped me organize this visit, because otherwise I would never have known about it, never have been able to even get there. She's a young woman who arrived there through a government program to help elderly people in remote locations.
Okay.
And so she arrived there and fell in love with the place, as I did as well. I mean, I would go back there in a heartbeat and sit there and drink tea with with the oldies or help them pick it. And she now helps them to sell their tea. So she runs their social media. They have a social media account, and she helps sell their tea in some of the local shops. And it's just there, I think, for general support. But it's really nice to see that there are like some young people who are doing these kind of things, and then they grow attached and decide to move there, and
fascinating. We have definitely. I'll try and find. I'll try and put links on the show notes about these things.
Yes, because they have the most dreamy Instagram account. They're called Nakai Chamurai. So the place is called Nakai Samurai.
Yeah,
like the word samurai.
Yeah, and the chai for tea.
And yes, and as a sort of a pun, they've put Nakai Chamurai. So cha means tea in Japanese. So it's like a play on words.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll definitely try and boost them.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We can wrap up here slowly. Is there anything that you couldn't put in the book that you found that you couldn't put in the book? Is there anything that made an impression to you and you couldn't put in the book from all your travels?
I mean, I tried to make sure everything that I wanted, made it into the book. There was a section that I ended up cutting, sadly. I had to cut 30 pages out of this book because I had written too much. There was too much information. I had to cut photos. I had to cut essays and words and everything. I did have a little feature on somen making. Somen are these really, really fine, like thinner than angel hair pasta, like really, really fine noodles. And when I was in Shodoshima, where I was visiting the soy sauce artisan, just around the corner from there was a somen shop that were, offering tours to show how somen is made, and letting you actually hand pull your own somen noodles. So I did that. I took my family to go and experience that. Everybody loved it because it was just amazing. So you start with the dough, that has been worked and worked and worked so that the gluten has really developed.
Yeah.
So it's just a flour and water dough. That's it. Regular wheat flour and water. And then you pull it, and you start to pull it until you've got these, tiny, tiny, really, really, really thin noodles. And they're about 2 meters long. Okay. So it's, you pull them.
Oh, wow.
And you're pulling them with chopsticks, which is also amazing. So I wanted to include the photos of this because I think even now, like describing it to you, it's really hard to, unless you see the photos, it's really hard to kind of comprehend how these are pulled and how they're so incredibly fine.
And that's all done by hand?
All done by hand. And so I was really interested in the history of it because they've apparently been doing this style noodle on this island for 430 years. And it was something that the farmers would do during the wintertime when they didn't have a lot going on, in the fields. And they needed to, make food and make some other money. But also it meant that they, in the wintertime, they had time because they weren't busy on the fields.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of time to make these noodles. It takes about 14 hours to make them by hand.
Wow.
Okay. So, and because it's laborious, you needed a lot of people to do it. So the whole family would be involved. And because it was wintertime, you also had to, make sure you did it, the end part of it at least, during daylight hours. So they would start making the dough at 3 a.m. because it took so long. And so you'd make the dough, and the beginning part would just be 3 a.m. You'd be, getting up and kneading the dough and kneading and kneading and kneading it. And then you would be stretching and pulling it, and then you'd want to dry it. So you want to be able to see, I think that people forget about how we only had electricity, recently. And so doing these sort of things 400 years ago or even 200 years ago, meant that you had to consider things like, when is it daylight? So it was a really laborious project, but because they had plenty of time in the wintertime, that is when they would make these noodles. And in fact, it also made sense because Japan is very, very humid in the summertime. It's really hot and really humid. And so you couldn't dry the noodles during the summer. They would grow mold, or you'd have to add way more salt to them, in order to be able to preserve them. So this was exclusively a winter activity that you'd make and dry the somen noodles over winter. I just think that was a really interesting story. And I have a somen noodle recipe in the soy sauce chapter. And so I had these pages with that story, with the photos of us how we pulled the noodles. But sadly, it all got cut. So,
damn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for another book, maybe.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. Something else. You can definitely do something else in the future.
Yes. So many fascinating things to talk about in Japan, though. All of these traditional foods and the histories behind them.
Fantastic. Well, this is a brilliant time to finish our episode today, our conversation. Can you tell people where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram, on my website. It's emikodavies.com. Instagram is just Emiko Davies. And I have a newsletter called Notes from Emiko's Kitchen that you could look up as well. You can find them on both Instagram and my website.
And you're writing articles and stuff somewhere specific, or you have some publications that you write for?
I do. So you'll find them on all of those resources as well. One of them is in Italian. So any Italian readers, I have a Japanese column in Corriere della Sera every month, and you'll see all the other ones in the either on Instagram or in my notes on Emiko's Kitchen newsletter. Those are the main places. Yes.
Excellent. And of course, we must remind everybody the Japanese Pantry is out now. And it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emiko, so much. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this latest adventure in faraway lands and found out more about the deep history and tradition of the Japanese cuisine. And I want to say thank you to all the supporters of the podcast on Patreon and on Acast. And please, your support means a lot to me. And share this podcast with friends and family and colleagues, and leave a rating and a review so we can reach more people and climb a bit further up the charts. This podcast can only exist with your generous support, and I love you all lots and lots and lots. I love you even more than pork and vegetable miso soup and umeboshi braised chicken.